Welcome to Her True Stories, where we uncover the most shocking tales of betrayal, resilience, and the sweetest revenge imaginable. If you're ready for a story that will leave you cheering for justice and questioning everything you thought you knew about family loyalty, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. My name is Mary Fletcher, and at 76 years old, I've learned that sometimes the people who owe you everything are the ones most eager to throw you away. But this story isn't about what they did to me. It's about what I did to them in return. Let me take you back to where it all began, 47 years ago, when I was a 29-year-old single mother with 2 young children and a determination that could move mountains. My husband James had died in a car accident when our son Michael was just 6 and our daughter Sarah was 4, leaving me with nothing but grief, debt, and 2 precious children who needed their mother to be stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. In 1978, single motherhood wasn't just challenging, it was social suicide. The judgmental stares, the whispered comments, the assumption that I was somehow damaged goods. But I didn't have the luxury of caring what people thought. I had 2 babies depending on me, and I was going to give them everything I never had. I worked 3 jobs in those early years. Mornings at the department store, afternoons cleaning offices, evenings waitressing at a diner. I dropped the kids at my neighbor Mrs. Henderson's house at 5 a.m. and picked them up at midnight, sometimes so exhausted I could barely drive home. But every dollar I earned went toward building something better for my children. By 1985, I'd saved enough to buy a small house in what would eventually become one of the most desirable neighborhoods in our city. It wasn't much then, a rundown 2-story with peeling paint and a leaky roof, but I saw potential where others saw problems. I spent every weekend for 2 years renovating that house with my own hands, learning plumbing and electrical work from library books, teaching my children that success comes from determination and sweat equity. Mom, why do we have to work so hard? 8-year-old Sarah asked one Saturday as we painted the living room together. She had yellow paint in her hair and on her nose, looking like a little angel despite her complaints. Because everything worth having requires effort, sweetheart, I told her, dipping my brush in the paint can. Someday you'll understand that the things you work for are more valuable than the things you're given. How wrong I was about that lesson taking hold. Michael was different from his sister, even as a child. Where Sarah was artistic and dreamy, Michael was practical and ambitious. He'd watch me balance the checkbook and ask questions about mortgages and investments. By the time he was 12, he was helping me research the best schools in our district and planning his academic future with the precision of a military strategist. "I'm going to be successful, Mom," he told me on his 13th birthday as we sat on our newly built deck, watching the sunset over our transformed backyard. "I'm going to make so much money that you'll never have to work again." "That's sweet, honey, but I work because I want to provide for you and Sarah, not because I have to. When I'm rich, you can just relax and enjoy life. You've done enough." Even then, there was something in his tone that should have warned me. The way he said, "You've done enough," like my usefulness had an expiration date. But I was so proud of his ambition, so grateful to see him thriving despite growing up without a father, that I missed the subtle signs of entitlement that were already taking root. Sarah, meanwhile, was developing into a beautiful and talented young woman. She painted, wrote poetry, and had a natural grace that reminded me of my own mother. But where my mother had been strong and independent, Sarah seemed to expect that someone else would always take care of the practical details of life. "Mom, can you drive me to art class?" became "Mom, can you pay for art supplies?" which became "Mom, can you talk to my teacher about my grade?" Sarah was learning to charm her way out of responsibility, and I was enabling her by saying yes to everything. I told myself I was being a good mother, providing the support I'd never had. What I was actually doing was raising 2 children who would grow up believing that Mary Fletcher existed solely to make their lives easier. The house appreciated dramatically over the years as the neighborhood gentrified around us. What I'd bought for $45,000 in 1985 was worth $200,000 by 1995 and $400,000 by 2005. I'd accidentally made one of the best real estate investments in the city's history, but more importantly, I'd created a stable home where my children could thrive. I paid for Michael's college education at the State University, where he studied business and finance. I paid for Sarah's art school tuition, her supplies, her apartment, and the various creative projects that never quite turned into careers. I never asked them to pay me back or contribute to household expenses. I told myself I was investing in their futures. Michael graduated with honors and immediately landed a job at a prestigious accounting firm. Sarah graduated with a degree in fine arts and immediately moved back home to figure out her next steps, a process that would take the next 15 years. By the time Michael was 30, he was making six figures and living in an expensive downtown condo. He'd married Jennifer, a lovely woman from a wealthy family, and they were building the kind of life I'd always dreamed my children would have. He visited every few weeks, always impeccably dressed, always full of stories about his success and his important clients. "Mom, you should think about downsizing," he said during one visit when he was 32. "This house is getting too big for you, and the maintenance costs must be enormous." "I can handle the maintenance, Michael. This is my home." "But it's not practical. You could sell this place, buy a nice condo, and have money left over for retirement." "I don't want a condo. I want my home." He dropped the subject then, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. Michael had developed his father's practical nature, but none of his warmth. Everything was a calculation, including his relationship with his mother. Sarah, meanwhile, had settled into a pattern of perpetual adolescence. At 35, she was still living in my house, still expecting me to pay for her expenses, still treating me like a combination mother, maid, and ATM. She'd had a series of relationships with men who were either broke artists or unemployed dreamers, and somehow their financial problems always became my financial problems. "Mom, Jake needs to borrow $3,000 to finish his novel," Sarah would say, batting her eyelashes like she was still 16. "Sarah, you're 35 years old. If Jake needs money for his novel, he should get a job and earn it. But he's so close to finishing. This could be the big break he needs." And I'd write the check, because saying no to Sarah had always been harder than saying no to anyone else. She had inherited her father's charm and learned to weaponize it against my maternal instincts. The years passed, and I grew older while my children grew more entitled. I developed arthritis in my hands, making the household maintenance more difficult. I had a minor heart attack at 68 that scared me into slowing down. But instead of my children stepping up to help, they seemed to view my aging as an inconvenience that needed to be managed. "Mom, we need to talk about your living situation," Michael said during a family meeting he'd called when I was 72. Sarah sat beside him, nodding like a bobblehead doll. "What about my living situation? You're getting older, and this house is becoming too much for you, Sarah, and I think it would be best if you moved into assisted living." "Assisted living? I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. But what if you fall? What if you have another heart attack? We'd feel terrible if something happened to you while you were alone in this big house." I looked at my children, my successful son in his expensive suit and my artistic daughter in her bohemian clothes, and realized that somewhere along the way, I'd raised two strangers who saw me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. "I'm not moving into assisted living. This is my home, and I'm staying here." Michael's jaw tightened. "Mom, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I built this life. I bought this house, and I'm not giving it up because you're worried about inconvenience." "It's not about inconvenience. Isn't it? When was the last time either of you offered to help with maintenance?" When was the last time you asked what I needed instead of telling me what you thought I should do? The meeting ended badly, with Michael storming out and Sarah crying about how I was being unfair to them. But I held my ground, not knowing that my defiance would set in motion a series of events that would ultimately reveal the true nature of the children I'd sacrificed everything to raise. The stroke came 18 months later, on a Tuesday morning in March. I was making coffee when I felt the left side of my face go numb, followed by a crushing headache that brought me to my knees. I managed to call 911 before the world went dark. When I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, my life, as I knew it, was over. The left side of my body was partially paralyzed, my speech was slurred, and I had developed what the doctors politely called oral motor dysfunction. I drooled constantly, unable to control the muscles in my mouth. The good news is that you're alive and your cognitive function is intact, Dr. Martinez told me gently. The challenging news is that you'll need significant rehabilitation and ongoing care. Can I go home? Eventually, yes. But you'll need help with daily activities, at least initially. Michael and Sarah visited me every day during my 2-week hospital stay, full of concerned expressions and supportive words. They assured me that they'd take care of everything, that I shouldn't worry about anything except getting better. I should have known then that their version of taking care of everything wouldn't include taking care of me. The first sign of what was coming appeared during my 3rd week of recovery at home. I was still weak, still struggling with the physical therapy exercises, still embarrassed by the constant drooling that I couldn't control despite the medications. Sarah had moved back into her old bedroom to help take care of me, and Michael was stopping by every evening after work. I thought they were being loving, supportive children. I was too naive to realize they were conducting reconnaissance. "Mom, I've been thinking about your bedroom situation," Sarah said one morning as she helped me with breakfast. I was still having trouble coordinating the movements necessary to eat without making a mess, and she'd taken over meal preparation. "What about it?" "Well, the stairs are really difficult for you now. Maybe we should set up a bed down here in the living room, at least temporarily." She was right about the stairs being challenging, but something in her tone made me suspicious. "I can manage the stairs with the handrail. I need to keep practicing." "But what if you fall? What if you get hurt?" "Sarah, I'm not an invalid. I'm recovering from a stroke, but I'm still your mother, and this is still my house." "Of course, Mom. I just want what's best for you." But over the next few weeks, subtle changes began appearing in the house. My personal items started disappearing from the main living areas. The family photos on the mantel were replaced with Sarah's artwork. My comfortable reading chair in the living room was moved to a corner to make room for Sarah's easel. "Where's my chair?" I asked one day when I came downstairs for lunch. "Oh, I moved it so I could set up my studio. You don't mind, do you?" "You can still sit in it. It's just in a different spot." But the different spot was facing the wall in a dark corner, clearly not intended for actual use. My living room was being transformed into Sarah's art studio, with me treated like a piece of furniture to be rearranged as needed. Michael's visits became more frequent, but less personal. He'd arrive with clipboards and paperwork, asking questions about my finances, my insurance, my legal documents. He explained that he was organizing my affairs to make sure everything was properly managed during my recovery. "Mom, I think we should set up a power of attorney, just as a precaution," he said one evening as we sat at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd helped him with his homework 30 years earlier. Power of attorney for what? Just general financial matters. If something happens to you, someone needs to be able to pay your bills and handle your accounts. "Nothing's going to happen to me, Michael. I'm getting stronger every day." "I know, but it's just good planning. Sarah and I would be joint power of attorney holders, so there'd be oversight." Something about the way he said oversight made my skin crawl. "I'll think about it. Mom, this is important. You need to be practical about your situation." There was that word again, practical. In Michael's world, Being practical meant accepting that I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. The power of attorney documents appeared on my kitchen table the next morning with sticky notes marking where I needed to sign. Sarah stood over me with coffee and my medication, chattering about how this was just a formality that would make everything easier. I signed the papers. God help me, I signed them because I trusted my children and because I was still weak enough to believe that they had my best interests at heart. Within a week, the first changes appeared in my bank statements. Small amounts at first, grocery purchases, utility payments, household expenses that Michael explained were more efficient when handled through his accounts. But the amounts grew larger, and the explanations grew vaguer. "What's this $800 charge for home improvement?" I asked during one of our weekly financial reviews. Sarah needed to buy some supplies for her studio setup. "It's an investment in her career, and she's living here to take care of you, so it's really a household expense." $800 for art supplies? Professional equipment is expensive, Mom. Sarah's finally getting serious about her art career, and we need to support her. I noticed that when Michael said we, he meant my money supporting Sarah's dreams, not his money. The physical changes in the house accelerated as my mobility slowly improved. I was getting stronger, but Sarah seemed determined to make me feel weaker. She'd hover over me during meals, wiping my mouth like I was a child. She'd insist on helping me with tasks I could manage myself, then sigh dramatically about how exhausting it was to take care of me. "Maybe we should look into getting you some professional help," she suggested one day as I struggled to fold laundry. "A home health aide or something." "I don't need professional help. I need practice and patience." "But it's so hard watching you struggle. Maybe someone trained in stroke recovery could help you more effectively." What she meant was that watching me drool and move slowly was embarrassing for her, and she wanted someone else to deal with the unpleasant aspects of my recovery. The breaking point came during my 4th month of recovery. I was having a good day. My speech was clearer, my coordination was improving, and I'd managed to make myself breakfast without help. I was feeling proud of my progress when Michael arrived with a woman I'd never seen before. "Mom, this is Karen Mitchell. She's a social worker who specializes in stroke recovery and family care planning." Karen was a pleasant woman in her 40s who spoke to me in the condescending tone that people use with small children and elderly patients. "Mrs. Fletcher, your son has asked me to evaluate your living situation and make recommendations for your ongoing care needs." "I don't need anyone to evaluate my living situation. I live in my own home, and I'm managing fine." I understand this is difficult, but families often need guidance during major health transitions. "May I ask you a few questions about your daily routine?" The evaluation was a humiliating exercise in cataloging my limitations. Karen asked about my eating habits. I sometimes needed help cutting food. My hygiene routine, showering took longer and required a safety chair. My mobility, I used a walker for longer distances, and my medication management. Sarah had taken over organizing my pills. What she didn't ask about were my strengths, my intact memory, my improving speech, my determination to regain independence, or my absolute ownership of the house where this evaluation was taking place. "Mrs. Fletcher, based on what I've observed and what your children have told me, I think there are some care options we should discuss," Karen said at the conclusion of her visit. "Such as?" "Well, there are some excellent assisted living facilities in the area that specialize in stroke recovery. They have physical therapy, social activities, medical support." "I'm not moving to assisted living. I understand your reluctance, but we need to consider what's safest and most practical for everyone involved." There was that word again. Practical. What's most practical is for me to continue recovering in my own home with my own things around me. Michael stepped forward. "Mom, be reasonable. You're not getting any younger, and your needs are only going to increase. Sarah can't continue living here indefinitely to take care of you." "I never asked Sarah to take care of me. I can take care of myself." "But you can't really. You need help with basic tasks. You're isolated here during the day. And what if there's another medical emergency? Karen nodded sympathetically. Mrs. Fletcher, I know this is difficult, but sometimes loving someone means making hard decisions for their own good. I looked at my son and daughter, these two people I'd sacrificed everything to raise, and saw strangers plotting to dispose of an inconvenience. They weren't concerned about my safety or my happiness. They were concerned about their own convenience and their inheritance. Everyone needs to leave, I said quietly. Mom.
Now.
All of you, get out of my house. Mrs. Fletcher, I think we should continue this conversation when you're feeling less emotional, Karen said. I'm not emotional. I'm angry. This is my house, and I want all of you to leave immediately. After they left, I sat in my living room, the living room that was slowly being transformed into Sarah's art studio, and realized that I was at war. My own children had decided I was a burden to be managed rather than a mother to be honored, and they were systematically taking control of my life. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They assumed that because I'd had a stroke, I was no longer capable of fighting back. They were about to learn that Mary Fletcher hadn't survived 47 years of single motherhood by being weak or passive. And if they wanted to treat me like an enemy, I was prepared to become their worst nightmare. The transformation of my house from home to prison happened gradually, then all at once. It started with small suggestions that became firm expectations, which eventually became non-negotiable rules that I had no say in creating. Mom, I think it would be better if you spent more time in the basement family room, Sarah announced one morning in late July, 6 months after my stroke. She was setting up another easel in what used to be my dining room, spreading her art supplies across the table where I'd served thousands of family meals. Why would I want to spend time in the basement? It's cooler down there, and you won't have to worry about getting in my way while I'm working. Plus, there's a bathroom right there, so you won't have to climb the stairs as often. I looked around at what had once been my dining room. My china cabinet had been pushed into a corner and covered with a sheet. My family photos had been taken down and replaced with Sarah's paintings. The chandelier I'd saved 3 months to buy was draped with drying canvases. This is my dining room, Sarah. I should be able to use it whenever I want. Of course you can use it, Mom. But I need space to work, and this room has the best natural light. Besides, you hardly ever have dinner guests anymore. She was right about the dinner guests. Who wants to socialize with a woman who drools uncontrollably and speaks with a slur? But that didn't mean I should be exiled from my own living spaces. I think I'll stay upstairs. Thank you. Sarah's face tightened with annoyance. Mom, I'm trying to build a career here. I finally have a chance to create a proper studio, and you're being selfish about it. Selfish. I was being selfish for wanting to use my own dining room in my own house. The basement had been finished during my renovation years, complete with a comfortable seating area, a small kitchenette, and a full bathroom. It was a nice space, but it was also isolated from the main house, accessible only through a narrow staircase that was becoming increasingly difficult for me to navigate. Over the next few weeks, more of my belongings found their way to the basement. My favorite reading chair was moved down there for my comfort. My television was relocated so I wouldn't disturb Sarah's creative process. Even some of my clothes were transferred to the basement closet to make things more convenient. Michael supported every change with financial justifications. Mom, Sarah's art is finally starting to sell. She made $800 last month from her online gallery. This studio setup is an investment in her future. What about my future? What about my comfort in my own home? You'll be comfortable in the basement. It's like having your own apartment, with everything you need right there. Everything I needed except dignity, respect, and the right to live freely in the house I'd spent decades building. The final insult came on a Thursday evening in August. I was in the kitchen making myself dinner. a simple task that had taken me weeks to relearn but that I could now manage independently. When Michael arrived with Jennifer and their two young children, Emma and James, aged 8 and 6. "Mom, we're here for dinner," Michael announced, as if this had been planned. "I didn't know you were coming. I only made enough for myself." "That's okay," Jennifer brought takeout. "We thought it would be nice to have a family dinner." They proceeded to set up their meal in my kitchen while I stood there holding my simple sandwich, feeling like an intruder in my own home. The children ran around making noise while Jennifer and Sarah discussed Sarah's latest painting techniques. Michael reviewed some paperwork at the table, treating my kitchen like his office. I sat down with my sandwich, trying to eat carefully to minimize the drooling, when 6-year-old Emma pointed at me and loudly announced, "Grandma's mouth is leaking." The table went silent. I felt my face burn with humiliation as everyone stared at me. "Emma, that's not polite," Jennifer said half-heartedly, but she was looking at me with barely concealed disgust. "It's okay," I managed to say through my slurred speech, reaching for a napkin to wipe my mouth. "Maybe Grandma should eat downstairs," 8-year-old James suggested. "Then she won't leak on our food." Michael and Jennifer exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Sarah suddenly became very interested in her phone, and I realized that my own grandchildren saw me as something disgusting to be hidden away. "You know what?" Michael said after an uncomfortable pause. "That's actually not a bad idea. Mom, maybe it would be more comfortable for you to eat in the family room downstairs. More private, less chaotic." This is my kitchen. I know, but with the kids here and all the activity, it might be easier for everyone if you had your meals downstairs. Just for tonight. But just for tonight became the new normal. Whenever Michael's family visited, I was expected to disappear into the basement like a shameful secret. The message was clear. My appearance, my drooling, my slurred speech were embarrassments that needed to be hidden from polite company. The basement became my designated living space, and my access to the rest of my own house became increasingly restricted. Sarah would roll her eyes and sigh dramatically if I appeared in her studio during the day. Michael would suggest that I might be more comfortable downstairs whenever his family visited. Even delivery drivers and repair people were told to direct their questions to Sarah, as if I no longer existed as the homeowner. The breaking point came on a Saturday afternoon in September. I had climbed the stairs to get something from my bedroom when I heard voices in the living room, Michael and Sarah talking with someone I didn't recognize. "Complete care facility would really be the best option," a male voice was saying. "At her age and with her condition, she needs more supervision than family members can reasonably provide." "But she's so stubborn about it," Sarah replied. "She insists she's fine living here, but it's obvious she's not capable of independent living anymore." "That's common with stroke patients," the man continued. "They often lack insight into their own limitations. Family members have to make the difficult decisions." I crept closer to the staircase, straining to hear more. "What we need is documentation," Michael said. "Evidence that she's not safe living alone, that her judgment is impaired, that she needs institutional care." "I can help with that," the stranger replied. "If you can document instances of confusion, safety issues, medication noncompliance, we can build a case for guardianship. Once you have legal guardianship, you can make decisions about her living situation regardless of her preferences." Guardianship. They were plotting to have me declared incompetent so they could force me into a nursing home against my will. "How long would something like that take?" Sarah asked. "With the right documentation, probably 60 to 90 days. The key is establishing a pattern of impaired judgment and unsafe behavior." "That shouldn't be hard," Michael said with a laugh that chilled my blood. "She's already isolated herself in the basement most of the time. A few more incidents, and we'll have everything we need." I stood on those stairs, listening to my children plan my imprisonment, and felt something inside me snap. Not break, snap like a steel cable under too much tension. They wanted to document my impaired judgment. They wanted evidence of unsafe behavior. They wanted to establish that I was no longer competent to make my own decisions. Fine. I'd give them exactly what they were looking for, just not in the way they expected. Mary Fletcher had spent 47 years being reasonable, being accommodating, being the perfect mother who sacrificed everything for her ungrateful children. But that woman was gone, destroyed by their cruelty and selfishness. The woman who walked back down to the basement that day was someone entirely different, a 76-year-old stroke survivor with nothing left to lose and a lifetime of fury to unleash. They wanted to treat me like an incompetent old woman? Perfect. Incompetent old women can do things that no one sees coming. They can make decisions that shock everyone. They can move in ways that no one predicts because no one takes them seriously enough to watch carefully. Michael and Sarah thought they were hunting a wounded animal. They had no idea they'd backed a lioness into a corner, and she was about to remind them why that's always a fatal mistake. The indignities multiplied like a cancer over the following weeks. What had started as suggestions for my comfort became absolute rules enforced with emotional manipulation and outright coercion. "Mom, you know you're not supposed to be up here when I have clients coming," Sarah said one Tuesday morning when she found me in my own kitchen making coffee. She was setting up for what she called a studio tour for potential buyers, essentially turning my house into a commercial art gallery without my permission. "I live here, Sarah. I should be able to make coffee in my own kitchen. But you'll drool in front of my clients, and that's not professional. Can't you just use the coffee maker downstairs?" The basement kitchenette had a small coffee maker, but the coffee always tasted stale and the water pressure was weak. More importantly, the basement coffee maker was a constant reminder that I was being relegated to the servants' quarters of my own home. "I prefer the kitchen coffee maker." Sarah's face flushed with anger. "God, Mom, why do you have to make everything so difficult? I'm finally building something here, and you're sabotaging me with your selfishness." Selfishness. There was that word again, wielded like a weapon against any attempt I made to assert my rights in my own home. "Fine," I said, turning to go back downstairs. "I'll use the basement coffee. And Mom, it would be better if you stayed down there until after my appointment. Mrs. Peterson is very particular about professional environments." Mrs. Peterson couldn't be exposed to the sight of a stroke survivor who drooled. I was becoming a dirty secret to be hidden whenever respectable people visited. The pattern was becoming clearer every day. I was being systematically erased from my own life, confined to the basement like a crazy relative in a Victorian novel. But unlike those unfortunate women, I wasn't actually crazy. I was just inconvenient. Michael's visits had taken on the character of inspections. He'd arrive with his clipboard and his concerned expressions, documenting everything I did or said that could potentially be used against me in court. "Mom, Mrs. Henderson mentioned that you were outside in your bathrobe yesterday morning," he said during one of his check-ins. Mrs. Henderson was my elderly neighbor who'd apparently become an informant in my children's campaign against me. I was getting the newspaper. "But you were in your bathrobe. What if someone had seen you?" "Someone did see me, Mrs. Henderson. And she's the one who told you about it." "That's not the point. The point is that your judgment seems to be declining. Normal people don't go outside in their night clothes. Normal people get their newspapers however they want in their own front yards." Michael made a note on his clipboard. "Mom, I'm worried about your decision-making abilities. This kind of behavior suggests that you might not be thinking clearly." Every conversation became evidence. Every choice I made was analyzed for signs of incompetence. Every aspect of my life was scrutinized for proof that I couldn't be trusted to make my own decisions. The worst part was the pretense of concern. Michael and Sarah spoke to me in the patronizing tones adults use with children, full of fake warmth and underlying threat. They weren't just stealing my independence, they were gaslighting me into believing I deserved to lose it. "We're just worried about you, Mom," Sarah would say whenever I complained about my increasingly restricted existence. We want what's best for you. What was best for me, according to them, was to disappear quietly into the basement and stop expecting to be treated like the owner of my own home. The basement itself was comfortable enough. I'd made sure of that during the renovation. But comfort wasn't the issue. The issue was that I was being imprisoned in my own house by the children I'd sacrificed everything to raise. I had a small refrigerator stocked with basics, a microwave for heating simple meals, and a television for entertainment. There was a comfortable couch, good lighting for reading, and even a small desk where I could pay bills or write letters. It was like a studio apartment, except I hadn't chosen to live there and I couldn't leave without permission. The stairs to the main floor became my prison bars. I could climb them. My physical therapy had been successful enough that I could navigate stairs with the handrail, but I wasn't welcome on the other side. Every time I appeared upstairs, I was met with sighs, eye rolls, and subtle pressure to return to my designated area. "Mom, you seem tired," Sarah would say whenever I emerged from the basement. "Maybe you should rest downstairs for a while." "Mom, is everything okay down there?" Michael would ask, as if my presence upstairs indicated some kind of emergency. The message was clear. My place was in the basement, and any attempt to reclaim my own living spaces was evidence of confusion or poor judgment. But what my children didn't understand was that isolation and humiliation were forging me into something harder than they'd ever imagined. Every indignity made me stronger. Every insult made me more determined. Every attempt to diminish me only increased my resolve to fight back. I began planning my revenge with the same methodical approach I'd used to raise them as a single mother. I made lists, gathered information, and carefully considered my options. I had advantages they didn't know about and resources they'd overlooked in their eagerness to control me. The most important advantage was that they underestimated me completely. In their minds, I was a damaged old woman whose stroke had made her weak and dependent. They saw the drooling and heard the slurred speech and concluded that my mind was as compromised as my motor functions. They were wrong. My cognitive abilities were intact. My memory was sharp. My understanding of legal and financial matters was comprehensive. Most importantly, my capacity for strategic thinking had been enhanced by months of enforced solitude in which I had nothing to do but plan. Sarah thought she was building her art career in my house. Michael thought he was managing my decline toward institutional care. Both of them thought they were cleverly positioning themselves to inherit my property and whatever remained of my money. None of them realized that the woman in the basement was conducting the most important investigation of her life, gathering evidence of their financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and fraudulent manipulation of a stroke survivor. They wanted to document my incompetence? Fine. I was documenting their criminal behavior. They wanted to establish guardianship over me? Excellent. I was establishing grounds for prosecution against them. They thought they were hunting a wounded animal? Perfect. Because wounded animals with nothing left to lose are often the most dangerous predators of all. The basement that was supposed to be my prison was actually my war room, and Mary Fletcher was about to launch the most devastating counterattack of her 76 years on this earth. Living in the basement gave me something my children never expected: time and invisibility. While they were busy redecorating my house and spending my money, I was quietly documenting every crime they committed. The power of attorney documents they'd pressured me into signing had given them access to my bank accounts, but they'd made a crucial mistake. They'd left me able to view all transactions online. Every morning, I'd sit at my little basement desk with my laptop, methodically recording their theft. Sarah's art supplies had expanded to include a $1,200 professional easel, $800 lighting system, and a $600 monthly subscription to premium art materials. Michael's household management fees included $300 monthly payments to a cleaning service I'd never seen, $450 for home security monitoring that didn't exist, and mysterious consulting fees of $500 per month that seemed to coincide with his mortgage payments. In 3 months, they'd stolen over $12,000 from my accounts, all carefully disguised as legitimate expenses for my care and household maintenance. But the financial theft was just the beginning. I started recording their conversations using a small digital recorder I'd ordered online and had delivered to Mrs. Henderson's house. She'd become suspicious of my children's behavior and was happy to help, sneaking the package to me during one of her concerned neighbor visits. "Mary, something's not right about how they're treating you," she whispered as she handed me the small device. "In all my years, I've never seen children lock their mother in the basement of her own house." "They're not locking me in, Ruth. They're just managing my care." "Bullshit," Ruth said with the bluntness that comes with being 83 years old. "They're stealing from you and treating you like garbage. If you need help, you just holler." The recorder captured conversations that revealed the true scope of their plan. Hidden in the basement, I could hear everything that happened in the kitchen directly above me, and my children had grown careless about what they said within my supposed earshot. "The real estate agent says the house could sell for $750,000, maybe more." Michael's voice came through clearly one evening. "Once we get guardianship established, we can move her to Sunset Manor and put the house on the market." "How long before the guardianship goes through?" Sarah asked. "My lawyer says 60 days, maybe 90 if she fights it. But we have plenty of evidence of impaired judgment and unsafe behavior." "What kind of evidence?" "The bathrobe incident, her refusal to accept help, her insistence on living independently despite her obvious limitations. Plus, we can document her social isolation and depression." "But she's not depressed," Sarah said. "She's angry." "Same thing legally." An elderly stroke patient who's angry and isolated can be presented as depressed and incompetent, especially when she's living in a basement and refusing to socialize normally. They were creating the evidence they needed by forcing me into the very isolation they planned to use against me. It was brilliant and evil in equal measure. "What about the money situation?" Sarah continued. "I've been documenting every expense as care-related. When the court reviews her finances, they'll see that we've been responsible stewards of her resources. The fact that her accounts have been declining will support our argument that she needs professional financial management. And after she's in the nursing home, we sell the house, pay off the nursing home costs, and split whatever's left. Should be at least $400,000 each, maybe more." I sat in my basement listening to my children plan my imprisonment and the theft of my life's work, and I felt something I'd never experienced before, a cold, crystalline hatred that was completely separate from love or family obligation. These weren't my children anymore. They were predators who happened to share my DNA. But their plan had a fatal flaw. They assumed I was as helpless as I appeared. Over the next month, I gathered evidence with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a federal case. I documented every financial transaction, recorded dozens of conversations, and began researching the laws surrounding elder abuse, financial exploitation, and fraudulent guardianship proceedings. What I discovered was that my children weren't just morally bankrupt, they were criminally liable for multiple felonies. Financial exploitation of an elderly person carried penalties of up to 10 years in prison. Fraudulent guardianship applications were considered perjury, punishable by up to 5 years. Identity theft for using my accounts without proper authorization could result in additional charges. But I wasn't interested in just having them arrested. I wanted to destroy their lives as completely as they'd tried to destroy mine. Michael's accounting firm had strict ethical guidelines about employees involved in financial crimes. A felony conviction would not only cost him his job, but would make him unemployable in his field. His professional license would be revoked, his reputation destroyed, his comfortable lifestyle obliterated. Sarah's emerging art career was built on the social connections she'd made while living in my house and using my money. A criminal conviction for elder abuse would make her toxic in the art community, where reputation and moral character were almost as important as talent. Jennifer, Michael's wife, came from a wealthy family that prized social standing above all else. A husband convicted of stealing from his stroke victim mother would be grounds for immediate divorce and social exile from their exclusive circle. I was going to destroy all of them, but I needed to be strategic about timing and execution. One wrong move, and they could accelerate their guardianship timeline and have me locked away before I could fight back. The opportunity I'd been waiting for came in November, 4 months into my basement imprisonment. Michael arrived one evening with a social worker I hadn't met before, a younger woman with an official clipboard and a serious expression. "Mom, this is Patricia Wells from the County Adult Protective Services," Michael said as they settled into my living room. "She's here to do a wellness check based on some concerns that have been raised about your living situation." I knew this was the beginning of their final assault. Patricia Wells was here to gather the evidence they needed for their guardianship petition. Every word I said would be analyzed for signs of confusion or impaired judgment. "Mrs. Fletcher, I understand you've been living primarily in the basement of your home," Patricia said, consulting her notes. "Can you tell me about that arrangement?" "My children think it's safer for me down there," I replied, carefully controlling my speech to minimize the slurring. "They've set up everything I need." "And how do you feel about that arrangement?" This was the crucial moment. If I complained about being forced into the basement, they'd claim I was paranoid and delusional. If I accepted it too readily, they'd claim I lacked the judgment to recognize inappropriate living conditions. "It's comfortable enough," I said carefully, "but I miss having access to my whole house." Patricia made a note. "Do you feel safe living here?" "I feel safe, yes. But I don't feel free."
"What do you mean by that?"
"I mean that this is my house, and I built my life here, but I'm not allowed to live in it anymore. I'm confined to the basement like a punishment." Michael stepped forward. "Mom, that's not true. You're welcome anywhere in the house. We've just tried to make the basement convenient for you. Am I welcome in the dining room when Sarah has clients? Am I welcome in the kitchen when your family visits for dinner? Am I welcome to make my own decisions about my own property?" Patricia was writing furiously. "Mrs. Fletcher, do you feel that your children are controlling your access to your own home?" "I feel that my children have decided I'm an embarrassment who needs to be hidden away. I feel that they're spending my money without my permission and making decisions about my life without my input. I feel that they're trying to steal my house and put me in a nursing home against my will." "Mom," Sarah protested, "we're trying to take care of you." "You're trying to take care of yourselves," I said, my voice stronger now. "You're stealing my money, selling my possessions, and planning to have me declared incompetent so you can take everything I've worked for." Patricia looked up from her notes. "These are very serious allegations, Mrs. Fletcher. Do you have any evidence to support these claims?" I smiled for the first time in months. "Yes, I do. Would you like to see it?" The look of panic that flashed across Michael's face was worth every humiliation I'd endured in the past 4 months. They'd been so busy documenting my alleged incompetence that they'd never considered I might be documenting their actual crimes. "Mom, you're confused," Sarah said desperately. "You don't understand what?" "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "I understand that you've stolen over $12,000 from my accounts in the past 3 months. I understand that you've been planning to sell my house and put me in Sunset Manor against my will. I understand that you've been manufacturing evidence of my incompetence while committing actual crimes against me." Patricia Wells looked at Michael and Sarah with new interest. "Is this true?" "Our mother is having some cognitive issues," Michael said smoothly. "She's become paranoid and accusatory since her stroke. That's actually why we requested this evaluation. I see, Patricia said. Mrs. Fletcher, would you be willing to show me this evidence you mentioned? I'd be delighted to. As I led Patricia Wells down to my basement prison, I felt a satisfaction deeper than anything I'd experienced since my stroke. My children thought they were so clever, so careful, so certain that their helpless mother could never fight back. They were about to learn that the most dangerous enemy is the one you underestimate completely. Patricia Wells spent 3 hours in my basement, reviewing the evidence I'd been meticulously gathering for months. I showed her bank statements with highlighted unauthorized transactions, played recordings of Michael and Sarah discussing their guardianship plan, and presented a detailed timeline of their financial exploitation and emotional abuse. Mrs. Fletcher, this is quite comprehensive, Patricia said as she reviewed my documentation. You've essentially conducted a thorough investigation of your own case. I had a lot of time on my hands, being confined to the basement. About that, can you walk me through a typical day in your current living situation? I described my routine. Waking up in the basement, making coffee in the kitchenette because I wasn't welcome in my own kitchen, eating meals alone because I was too embarrassing to dine with family, and spending my days hidden away like a shameful secret. And when do you go upstairs? When I'm summoned for wellness checks or when I need something for my bedroom. But I'm made to feel unwelcome whenever I appear in the main house. Patricia was taking extensive notes. Mrs. Fletcher, in your opinion, are you capable of living independently? I was living independently before my children moved in and took over. I can cook simple meals, manage my medications, handle my finances, and maintain basic hygiene. What I can't do is control the drooling, and apparently that makes me unfit for human society. Has anyone suggested that your drooling makes you unfit for society? My grandson suggested I eat downstairs so I wouldn't leak on their food. My children consistently remove me from sight whenever guests visit. I've been told repeatedly that my appearance is embarrassing and unprofessional. Patricia closed her notebook and looked at me directly. Mrs. Fletcher, I need to ask you something important. If you had the opportunity to live independently again, would you want that? More than anything in the world, even knowing that you'd need some assistance with certain tasks. I've been hiring help for household tasks since before my stroke. I can afford cleaning services, grocery delivery, even a part-time aide if necessary. What I can't afford is to lose my dignity and my freedom to children who see me as a burden. Patricia nodded slowly. I'm going to need to speak with Michael and Sarah now. But Mrs. Fletcher, I want you to know that based on what I've seen here today, I have serious concerns about your current living arrangement. What kind of concerns? The kind that might require immediate intervention. An hour later, I could hear raised voices coming from the living room above. Michael and Sarah were arguing with Patricia, their tones growing increasingly desperate as they realized their plan was falling apart. Our mother is clearly not competent to live alone, Michael was saying. She's paranoid, she's making accusations, she's living in a basement because she can't handle the responsibilities of maintaining a full house.
Mr.
Morris, your mother is living in the basement because you and your sister have systematically excluded her from the rest of her own home, Patricia replied. And her so-called paranoia appears to be well-founded, given the evidence she's provided of financial exploitation. We have power of attorney, Sarah protested. Everything we've done has been legal. Having power of attorney doesn't give you the right to steal from your mother or confine her against her will. It gives you the responsibility to act in her best interests, which you've clearly failed to do. She's not confined, Michael said. She can go anywhere she wants. Can she? When was the last time she was welcome at your family dinners? When was the last time she was allowed to use her own kitchen without being criticized? When was the last time you treated her like the owner of this house instead of an unwanted houseguest? The arguments continued for another 30 minutes before Patricia appeared at the top of the basement stairs. Mrs. Fletcher, Could you come up here, please? I climbed the stairs slowly, using the handrail for support, and entered my living room to find Michael and Sarah looking like defendants awaiting a verdict. Mrs. Fletcher, based on my investigation today, I'm recommending that Adult Protective Services open a formal case involving allegations of financial exploitation and unlawful confinement, Patricia announced. I'm also recommending that your current power of attorney arrangement be reviewed by the court, as there's evidence it's been used improperly. Michael's face went white. You can't do that. We're her children. We're taking care of her. You're exploiting her, Patricia said bluntly. Mrs. Fletcher is clearly competent to make her own decisions, and she's being held prisoner in her own home by people who are stealing her money and planning to have her declared incompetent for their own financial gain. That's not true, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. We love our mother. Love doesn't include confining someone to a basement and stealing their life savings, Patricia replied. Mrs. Fletcher, do you have somewhere safe you can stay while we sort this out? This is my home. I'm not going anywhere. I understand, but given the hostility I've witnessed here today, I'm concerned about potential retaliation. If anyone should leave, it should be the people who don't belong here, I said, looking directly at my children. This is my house. I bought it, I renovated it, and I own it. They're the ones who should find somewhere else to live. Patricia nodded. That's actually not a bad point. Mrs. Fletcher, as the homeowner, you have the right to ask unwanted guests to leave your property. Even if they're family, especially if they're family members who are exploiting you. I turned to face Michael and Sarah. These two people I'd sacrificed everything to raise, who'd repaid my love with theft and cruelty. I want both of you out of my house. Tonight. Mom, you can't be serious, Michael said. I'm completely serious. You've stolen my money, imprisoned me in my own basement, and planned to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my house. You're no longer welcome here. But where will we go? Sarah wailed. That's not my problem. You're both adults with incomes and resources. Figure it out. Mom, please, Michael pleaded. We can work this out. We can fix this. No, we can't. You've shown me exactly who you are, and I believe you. Now get out. Patricia stepped forward. I think that's a reasonable request, given the circumstances. Mrs. Fletcher has the right to control who lives in her own home. But we have power of attorney, Sarah protested. Not anymore, I said. I'm revoking it immediately, and I'm pressing charges for financial exploitation and unlawful confinement. The look of panic in their eyes was almost satisfying enough to make up for months of humiliation. Almost. Mrs. Fletcher, I'll help you file the necessary paperwork to revoke the power of attorney and report the financial crimes, Patricia said. I'll also connect you with an attorney who specializes in elder abuse cases. Thank you. But first, I want to watch my children pack their belongings and leave my house. As Michael and Sarah trudged upstairs to gather their things, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. The basement prisoner was about to become the homeowner again, and her captors were about to learn what real consequences looked like. But this was just the beginning. Evicting them from my house was only the first step in a much larger plan for justice. They'd tried to steal my life. Now I was going to return the favor. Watching my children pack their belongings and leave my house was one of the most satisfying experiences of my 76 years. Sarah sobbed dramatically as she loaded her art supplies into boxes, as if she were the victim of some great injustice rather than a thief being evicted by her victim. Mom, you're making a terrible mistake, she said as she wrapped her canvases in bubble wrap. We were just trying to take care of you. By stealing my money and locking me in the basement. We never locked you anywhere. You chose to spend time downstairs. Even in defeat, she couldn't stop lying. But I no longer cared about her delusions or justifications. I just wanted her gone. Michael was more methodical in his packing, but I could see the fury in his movements as he gathered his papers and personal items. He kept shooting me looks of pure hatred, as if I'd betrayed him instead of the other way around. "This isn't over, Mom," he said as he carried the last box to his car. "You can't take care of yourself, and we're going to prove it." "Feel free to try," I replied. "But you'll be doing it from outside my house, without access to my money, and probably while dealing with criminal charges." Patricia Wells had left me with a folder full of resources: contact information for elder law attorneys, financial advisors who specialized in exploitation recovery, and home care services that could provide legitimate assistance without treating me like an invalid. After my children left, I stood in my empty house and felt a combination of relief and determination. The physical space was mine again, but the damage they'd done went far beyond rearranging furniture and stealing money. They'd shaken my confidence, made me question my own judgment, and forced me to see them as enemies rather than children. But they'd also given me something valuable: absolute clarity about who they really were and what they deserved. The first order of business was securing my finances. I spent the next morning on the phone with my bank, revoking the power of attorney and changing all my account passwords. The fraud department was very interested in the unauthorized transactions I reported, and they assured me that the stolen money would be recovered and the accounts would be flagged against future unauthorized access. "Mrs. Fletcher, we see this type of financial elder abuse more often than you might think," the fraud investigator told me. "Adult children who view their parents' assets as their inheritance often rationalize theft as early distribution. But it's still theft, and we take it very seriously." What happens to the people who do this? Prosecution, if the evidence is strong enough. And from what you've described, your evidence is very strong. The second order of business was reclaiming my living space. I hired a cleaning service to deep clean the house and remove all traces of Sarah's art studio from my dining room. I had my furniture moved back to its proper locations and my family photos returned to their places of honor on the mantel. Walking through my house that evening, seeing everything back where it belonged, I felt like a queen reclaiming her castle after a successful siege. But the most important order of business was planning my next moves in what was clearly going to be a war. Michael's parting threat made it clear that he wasn't going to accept defeat gracefully. He'd continue trying to have me declared incompetent, probably through different channels now that Adult Protective Services was watching. I needed allies, resources, and a strategy that would not only defend against their future attacks, but would also ensure they faced consequences for what they'd already done. The attorney Patricia had recommended was named David Blackstone, and his reputation in elder law was formidable. His office was downtown in a gleaming high-rise, and he received me personally within an hour of my phone call. "Mrs. Fletcher, I've reviewed the preliminary information Patricia Wells sent over, and I have to say, this is one of the most clear-cut cases of elder financial abuse I've seen," David said as we sat in his conference room overlooking the city. "Your documentation is exceptional. I had a lot of time to work on it while I was imprisoned in my basement. About that, what your children did could be considered unlawful imprisonment, which is a felony. Combined with the financial exploitation, they're looking at serious criminal charges. I want them prosecuted to the full extent of the law. I can help with that, but I also want to discuss protecting you from future exploitation attempts. Your son's threat suggests he's not done trying to gain control over your life and assets." David outlined a comprehensive legal strategy that included criminal referrals, civil recovery suits, and protective measures to prevent future guardianship attempts. The plan was aggressive, expensive, and exactly what I needed. "This will cost approximately $50,000 in legal fees," David warned. "Are you prepared for that level of investment?" "Mr. Blackstone, my children stole my money, stole my dignity, and tried to steal my freedom. $50,000 to destroy their lives in return seems like a bargain." "I like your attitude, Mrs. Fletcher. When do you want to start?" "Immediately. Over the next 2 weeks, David's team worked with the precision of a military operation. Criminal complaints were filed with the district attorney's office. Civil suits were prepared demanding the return of stolen funds plus punitive damages. Documentation was submitted to Michael's accounting firm detailing his criminal conduct. But the most satisfying action was the restraining order that prohibited both Michael and Sarah from coming within 500 feet of my house or contacting me in any way. Mrs. Fletcher, you should know that your son hired an attorney to fight the restraining order, David told me during one of our strategy meetings. He's claiming that you're mentally incompetent and that the restraining order prevents him from providing necessary care. What's his evidence of my incompetence? Apparently, he's arguing that no mentally competent person would accuse their loving children of elder abuse and theft. I laughed at the circular logic. So the fact that I'm fighting back against their abuse is proof that I'm too incompetent to recognize their love? That's essentially his argument, yes. And what does the court think of that argument? David smiled. The judge was not impressed. The restraining order stands, and she ordered a competency evaluation to settle the question once and for all. The competency evaluation was conducted by Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a neuropsychologist who specialized in stroke recovery and cognitive assessment. She spent 4 hours with me, conducting tests, reviewing my medical records, and evaluating my decision-making abilities. Mrs. Fletcher, I need to ask you directly. Do you believe your children were trying to help you or harm you? Dr. Chen asked during our final session. I believe they were trying to help themselves to my money and my house, I replied. Whether they convinced themselves that was the same as helping me is irrelevant. And do you think your decision to evict them and pursue legal action was reasonable? I think it was the most reasonable thing I've done in months. They were stealing from me, confining me, and planning to have me declared incompetent so they could steal more efficiently. Fighting back against that isn't a sign of mental illness, it's a sign of mental health. Dr. Chen's report was unequivocal. I was not only competent, but demonstrated exceptional cognitive function and sound judgment in protecting herself from financial exploitation and emotional abuse. She specifically noted that my decision to document the abuse and seek legal protection showed sophisticated reasoning and appropriate self-advocacy. The competency evaluation destroyed any remaining hope Michael and Sarah might have had of portraying me as a confused old woman who didn't understand her own best interests. I was officially certified as mentally sharp, legally competent, and justified in my actions against them. But the real satisfaction came when David called with news about the criminal investigation. Mrs. Fletcher, the district attorney, has decided to prosecute. Michael and Sarah are being charged with financial exploitation of an elderly person, conspiracy to commit fraud, and unlawful imprisonment. The first 2 charges are felonies. What kind of sentences are we talking about? If convicted, they're each looking at 5 to 10 years in prison, plus restitution and fines. I sat in my reclaimed living room, in my restore house, with my dignity intact and my enemies facing justice, and felt a satisfaction so deep it was almost spiritual. My children had tried to destroy me because they thought I was weak and helpless. Instead, they'd awakened something in me that was far more dangerous than they'd ever imagined, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The basement prisoner had become the queen of her own castle, and her former captors were about to learn what royal justice looked like. The criminal trial of Michael and Sarah Fletcher became front-page news in our city. Local mother fights back against greedy children was the headline that captured the public's imagination, and suddenly everyone wanted to hear the story of the 76-year-old stroke survivor who documented her own abuse and fought back against her exploitative children. The media attention was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it meant that Michael and Sarah's crimes were being exposed to the entire community, destroying their reputations and social standing. On the other hand, It meant I had to testify about the most humiliating period of my life in front of cameras and reporters. Mrs. Fletcher, are you prepared for the media scrutiny this trial will bring? David Blackstone asked me during one of our preparation sessions. The defense is going to try to portray you as a vindictive mother who's using the legal system to punish children who are genuinely trying to help. Let them try. I have recordings of them planning to steal my house and put me in a nursing home. I have bank records showing they stole over $12,000. I have documentation of every day I was forced to live in my own basement. Their genuine concern is a matter of public record. The trial began on a Monday morning in February, nearly a year after my stroke. I arrived at the courthouse wearing my best dress and using my walker with confidence rather than shame. I was no longer the broken woman who'd been hidden in a basement. I was a survivor seeking justice. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Maria Santos, had built her case around the theme of betrayal of trust. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Mary Fletcher spent 47 years sacrificing everything for her children. She worked 3 jobs to buy them a home. She paid for their education, their expenses, their dreams. And when she suffered a stroke and needed their support, they saw an opportunity instead of an obligation. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed the unauthorized transactions. Recordings captured Michael and Sarah discussing their plans to gain guardianship and sell the house. Testimony from Patricia Wells detailed the conditions they'd found me living in. But the most powerful evidence was my own testimony. I spent 2 days on the witness stand, describing in detail how my children had systematically stripped away my dignity and independence. Mrs. Fletcher, can you describe your living conditions during the period your children were residing in your home? Maria Santos asked. I was confined to the basement of my own house. I was told I couldn't use my own kitchen, my own dining room, or my own living spaces because my appearance was embarrassing and unprofessional. I was hidden away whenever guests visited, like a shameful family secret. And how did that make you feel? Like a prisoner. Like someone who no longer mattered. Like the 47 years I'd spent building that home and raising those children meant nothing. Did you ever consider that your children might have had your best interests at heart? People who have your best interests at heart don't steal your money to fund their own lifestyles. They don't plan to sell your house without your consent. They don't confine you to a basement and tell their friends you're incompetent. My children were acting in their own interests, not mine. The defense attorney, a slick young man named Bradley Morrison, tried to paint me as a confused old woman who'd misunderstood her children's loving care. His cross-examination was aggressive and condescending, exactly the kind of treatment I'd learned to expect from people who assumed stroke survivors were automatically incompetent. Mrs. Fletcher, isn't it true that you were having difficulty managing your household after your stroke? I was having difficulty with some physical tasks, yes. But I was managing my finances, making my own decisions, and living independently until my children moved in and took control. But didn't your children arrange for professional cleaning services and home maintenance to help you? They arranged for services using my money, without my permission, and charged me inflated rates for services I never requested. Mrs. Fletcher, your children say they were concerned about your safety living alone in such a large house. Isn't that a legitimate concern? It might be, if they discussed it with me instead of plotting behind my back to have me declared incompetent. It might be, if they'd offered to help me modify the house instead of planning to sell it. It might be, if they treated me like their mother instead of an obstacle to their inheritance. Bradley Morrison grew increasingly frustrated as his attempts to portray me as confused or vindictive failed. The competency evaluation had established the sentencing hearing was held on a cold morning in March, exactly 1 year after my stroke. The courtroom was packed with reporters, supporters, and curious onlookers who'd followed the trial through the media coverage. I sat in the front row with David Blackstone, watching as Michael and Sarah were led to the defendant's table in orange prison jumpsuits. They looked older, grayer, diminished by their time in jail awaiting sentencing. Sarah had lost weight and her artistic flair was gone, replaced by the hollow expression of someone who'd finally understood the consequences of her actions. Michael's business-casual confidence had evaporated, leaving behind a broken man who kept glancing at his wife Jennifer in the gallery. Jennifer had filed for divorce 2 weeks after the guilty verdict, citing irreconcilable differences and criminal conduct incompatible with family values. She'd already moved back to her parents' estate with the children, and Michael's attempts to contact them had been rebuffed by her family's lawyers. Judge Patricia Morrison was known for her tough sentences in elder abuse cases, and her expression as she reviewed the pre-sentencing reports suggested that reputation was well-deserved. "Before I pronounce sentence, I want to hear victim impact statements," Judge Morrison announced. "Mrs. Fletcher, would you like to address the court?" I stood slowly, using my walker for support but not for weakness. My voice was clearer now, the speech therapy having helped significantly, though the drooling remained a constant reminder of what I'd survived. "Your Honor, a year ago I was a stroke survivor trying to rebuild my life with the support of my children. I thought I was surrounded by love. Instead, I was surrounded by predators who saw my vulnerability as an opportunity." I looked directly at Michael and Sarah as I continued. "These defendants didn't just steal my money, they stole my dignity. They didn't just confine me to a basement, they tried to convince me I belonged there. They didn't just plan to take my house, they tried to make me believe I was too incompetent to deserve it." The courtroom was completely silent as I spoke. But the worst part wasn't the theft or the confinement or even the humiliation. The worst part was realizing that the children I'd sacrificed everything to raise had grown into adults who saw their mother as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. Sarah was crying now, but I felt no sympathy for her tears. She'd cried during her testimony too, and those tears had been just as manipulative and self-serving. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for mercy for these defendants. I'm asking for justice for every elderly person who's been exploited by the people they trusted most. I'm asking for a sentence that sends a clear message. Elder abuse will not be tolerated, especially when it's committed by family members." "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher," Judge Morrison said. "Is there anyone else who would like to speak on behalf of the victim?" Ruth Henderson, my neighbor, had asked to speak as a character witness. At 83, she was even more direct than I was. "Your Honor, I've known Mary Fletcher for 15 years, and I watched her raise those children as a single mother," Ruth said in her strong, clear voice. "She worked 3 jobs to give them everything they wanted. She put them through college, supported their dreams, and never asked for anything in return except love and respect." Ruth turned to look at Michael and Sarah with undisguised disgust. These two took that love and turned it into a weapon against their own mother. They stole from her, abused her, and planned to warehouse her in a nursing home so they could steal more efficiently. They're not children, they're criminals who happen to share her DNA. The defense attorneys made their final pleas for leniency, arguing that Michael and Sarah were good people who'd made mistakes while trying to care for a difficult mother. Their arguments fell flat in the face of the overwhelming evidence and the jury's unanimous guilty verdict. Judge Morrison spent several minutes reviewing her notes before addressing the defendants. "Michael Morris and Sarah Fletcher, you have been convicted of some of the most egregious elder abuse I've encountered in 20 years on the bench. You systematically exploited your mother's trust, stole her money, confined her against her will, and planned to have her declared incompetent for your financial gain." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What makes your crimes particularly heinous is that you committed them against the woman who sacrificed everything to give you opportunities in life. You repaid her love with cruelty, her trust with theft, and her vulnerability with exploitation. Michael and Sarah stood as Judge Morrison prepared to pronounce sentence. Michael Morris, you're sentenced to 8 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. You will pay full restitution of $12,847 to your mother, plus court costs and fines totaling $25,000. Michael's knees buckled, and his attorney had to steady him. 8 years was near the maximum sentence for his crimes. Sarah Fletcher, you're sentenced to 7 years in state prison, followed by 5 years of probation. You will pay restitution of $8,200 to your mother, plus court costs and fines totaling $20,000. Sarah collapsed into her chair, sobbing hysterically. Her dreams of an art career were finished. No gallery would represent a convicted elder abuser, and her social connections had already evaporated when news of her crimes became public. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, both defendants are prohibited from having any contact with the victim for the duration of their sentences and probation periods. Any attempt to contact Mrs. Fletcher directly or indirectly will result in additional criminal charges. As the bailiffs led my children away to begin their prison sentences, I felt a satisfaction so complete it was almost peaceful. Justice had been served not just for me, but for every elderly person who'd been victimized by family members who saw them as burdens rather than blessings. Outside the courthouse, I was surrounded by reporters asking for my reaction to the sentences. Mrs. Fletcher, do you feel justice was served today? One reporter asked. I feel that the system worked exactly as it should. People who commit crimes face consequences, regardless of their relationship to their victims. Do you have any regrets about prosecuting your own children? I have regrets about raising children who became criminals. I have no regrets about holding criminals accountable for their actions. What's next for you, Mrs. Fletcher? I smiled, feeling genuinely happy for the first time in over a year. I'm going home to my house, where I'm going to live freely and independently, surrounded by people who love and respect me. I'm going to prove that being elderly and having a stroke doesn't mean your life is over. It just means you have to be stronger and smarter about protecting what's yours. That evening, David Blackstone and I reviewed the civil recovery lawsuit that would seek additional damages beyond the criminal restitution. Mrs. Fletcher, we're seeking $100,000 in punitive damages on top of the stolen money, David explained. The jury award could be significantly higher, given the emotional distress and the malicious nature of their conduct. I don't need their money, David. I need them to understand that actions have consequences. Well, they certainly understand that now. 8 and 7 years in prison, plus probation, plus civil damages, plus destroyed careers and relationships. You've accomplished something remarkable, Mrs. Fletcher. What's that? You've proven that fighting back works. You've shown that elderly people don't have to accept abuse, even from their own families. You've become a symbol of resistance and justice. As I sat in my reclaimed living room that night, surrounded by my restored possessions and my hard-won freedom, I thought about the year that had transformed me from victim to victor. Michael and Sarah had tried to destroy me because they thought I was weak and helpless. Instead, they discovered that Mary Fletcher was tougher than they'd ever imagined, and that underestimating her was the biggest mistake of their lives. They were beginning 8 and 7 years in prison, respectively. Their careers were destroyed, their reputations ruined, their relationships dissolved. They'd lost everything they'd tried to steal from me, plus everything they'd had before they started their criminal enterprise. Meanwhile, I was free, vindicated, and stronger than I'd been before my stroke. The basement prisoner had become the queen of justice, and her former captors were learning what real powerlessness felt like. The war was over, and Mary Fletcher had won completely. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter that provided the perfect punctuation to my victory. It was from Michael, written on prison stationery in handwriting that looked older and more defeated than I remembered. Mom, it began, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to write this letter. Prison has given me time to think about what we did to you, and I finally understand how wrong we were. I almost threw the letter away without finishing it, but curiosity got the better of me. Sarah and I convinced ourselves that we were helping you, that we knew what was best for your life. But we weren't helping you. We were helping ourselves to your money and your house. We turned you into a prisoner in your own home because we saw you as an obstacle to our inheritance instead of our mother, who deserved respect and love. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing his remorse and his newfound understanding of their crimes. He wrote about the other prisoners who told him he was lower than scum for abusing his own mother. He described the divorce proceedings that had left him with nothing and the accounting license that had been permanently revoked due to his felony conviction. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, the letter concluded. I know that what we did was unforgivable, but I wanted you to know that I finally understand what we took from you, and I'm truly sorry. I read the letter twice, then fed it into my fireplace and watched it burn. His apology was 20 years too late and completely worthless. Understanding your crimes after you're caught and imprisoned isn't the same as having a conscience when you're committing them. But the letter did serve one useful purpose. It confirmed that my victory was complete and irreversible. The civil lawsuit had been settled out of court for $150,000, paid by Michael's and Sarah's remaining assets and Jennifer's family, who wanted to distance themselves from the scandal as quickly as possible. Combined with the criminal restitution, I'd recovered everything they'd stolen plus significant additional compensation for my suffering. More importantly, their lives had been destroyed as thoroughly as they'd tried to destroy mine. Michael would serve at least 6 years of his 8-year sentence before being eligible for parole. His accounting career was over, his marriage was dissolved, and his children had been told by their mother's family that he was a bad man who hurt Grandma Mary. When he was finally released, he'd be a middle-aged ex-convict with no marketable skills and no family support. Sarah's situation was even worse. Her art career had evaporated the moment her crimes became public. The galleries that had been interested in her work wanted nothing to do with an artist convicted of elder abuse. Her social media accounts had been flooded with comments calling her a monster and a disgrace. She'd serve at least 5 years, and when she was released, she'd have no career prospects and no artistic reputation left to rebuild. Both of them would spend decades paying restitution and fines, assuming they could find any employment with their criminal records. The children who'd planned to inherit my house and money would instead spend most of their remaining productive years paying for their crimes against me. But my victory extended far beyond personal justice. The media coverage of my case had inspired dozens of other elderly abuse victims to come forward and fight back against their exploiters. David Blackstone's office had been flooded with calls from seniors who'd been emboldened by my example to document their own abuse and seek legal protection. "Mrs. Fletcher, you've started a movement," David told me during one of our final meetings. "We've opened 12 new elder abuse cases in the past 6 months, all from people who said your story gave them courage to fight back." That's wonderful. Everyone deserves to live with dignity, regardless of their age or health conditions. There's something else. The state legislature is considering a new law that would make financial exploitation of elderly family members an automatic felony with enhanced penalties. They're calling it the Mary Fletcher Act. I was speechless. My name would be attached to legislation protecting other elderly people from the kind of abuse I'd suffered. It was a legacy I'd never imagined but couldn't be more proud of. The house that had once been my prison was now my sanctuary again. I'd hired a part-time housekeeper and a handyman for the tasks that were challenging with my limited mobility, but I maintained complete control over my own life and decisions. I cooked my own meals, managed my own finances, and invited whoever I wanted into my home. Ruth Henderson and I had become even closer friends, bonding over our shared experience of watching my children's downfall. We had dinner together twice a week and spent Sunday afternoons playing cards and gossiping about the neighbors. Mary, I have to ask you something, Ruth said one Sunday as we sat on my restored deck, watching the sunset over the backyard I'd landscaped decades earlier. Do you ever miss them? Michael and Sarah, I mean. I thought about the question seriously. Did I miss the children I'd raised? Or did I miss the illusion of loving children that had been shattered by their crimes? I miss the children I thought I had, I said finally. But those children never really existed. Michael and Sarah showed me who they really were when they thought I was helpless. I can't miss people who are just playing roles in order to eventually exploit me. Any regrets about how hard you came down on them? None whatsoever. They made their choices and I made mine. They chose to see me as a victim to be exploited. I chose to see them as criminals to be prosecuted. The only difference is that I was right. Ruth laughed. You're a tough old bird, Mary Fletcher. I learned to be. 47 years of single motherhood teaches you to be strong. Having a stroke teaches you to be resilient. Being betrayed by your own children teaches you to be ruthless, when necessary. As the sun set over my reclaimed kingdom, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought me to this moment of complete victory. A year and a half ago, I'd been a broken woman confined to a basement by her own children. Tonight, I was a free woman whose story had inspired legislative change and given hope to countless other abuse victims. Michael and Sarah were in prison cells, counting down the years until their release into lives that would never recover from their crimes. Their former friends avoided mentioning their names. Their professional reputations were destroyed. Their financial futures were obliterated by restitution payments and legal costs. They'd gambled everything on the belief that I was too weak to fight back, and they'd lost everything they had plus everything they'd tried to steal. Meanwhile, I was stronger, wealthier, and more respected than I'd been before my stroke. The basement prisoner had become the queen of her own destiny, and her former captors had learned what real powerlessness felt like. It was, without question, the sweetest victory of my 76 years on this earth. 2 years after my children's sentencing, I received an invitation that represented the ultimate vindication of my fight for justice. The National Elder Rights Organization wanted to present me with their Courage in Advocacy Award at their annual conference in Washington, D.C. Mrs. Fletcher, your case has become a landmark in elder abuse law, the organization's president, Dr. Margaret Walsh, told me during our phone conversation. You've shown that elderly people can fight back effectively against exploitation, even when it comes from their own families. I just did what needed to be done to protect myself. That's exactly why your story is so powerful. You didn't accept being victimized, and you didn't rely on others to save you. You saved yourself, and in doing so, you've saved countless others. The trip to Washington was my first airplane flight since my stroke, and I was nervous about managing the travel with my walker and occasional drooling. But David Blackstone had insisted on accompanying me, and his presence made the journey manageable. The award ceremony was held in a ballroom filled with 800 advocates, attorneys, and elderly rights activists from across the country. As I sat at the head table, looking out at the audience, I thought about how far I'd come from the woman who'd been hidden in a basement because her appearance was considered embarrassing. Our honoree tonight represents the very best of what's possible when elderly people refuse to accept abuse and fight back against exploitation, Dr. Walsh said as she introduced me. Mary Fletcher didn't just save herself, she became a symbol of resistance that has inspired legislative change and empowered countless other victims to seek justice. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. When I finally reached the podium, I looked out at faces filled with respect and admiration, emotions I hadn't seen directed toward me in far too long. 2 years ago, I was a stroke survivor living in the basement of my own home, being systematically abused by the children I'd sacrificed everything to raise, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. Tonight, I'm standing before you as proof that being elderly and having health challenges doesn't mean you're powerless. I spoke for 20 minutes about my experience, the legal battle, and the importance of fighting back against elder abuse regardless of who the perpetrators are. The hardest part wasn't proving that crimes had been committed, I told the audience. The hardest part was accepting that my own children were the criminals. But blood relationships don't excuse criminal behavior, and family love doesn't require accepting abuse. The response was overwhelming. During the reception afterward, I was approached by dozens of people who shared their own stories of fighting back against abusive family members. Many credited my case with giving them the courage to seek legal protection. "Mrs. Fletcher, my son was stealing from my pension," one elderly man told me. "I saw your story on the news and realized I didn't have to accept it. He's in prison now, and I'm living freely for the first time in 5 years. My daughter was trying to have me declared incompetent so she could sell my house," said an elderly woman with tears in her eyes. "Your example showed me that I could fight back." She backed down when I hired a lawyer and threatened prosecution. Story after story, victory after victory, all inspired by my refusal to accept victimization. The basement prisoner had become a symbol of hope for elderly people nationwide. But the most satisfying moment came when David pulled me aside with news about Michael and Sarah. "Mrs. Fletcher, I thought you'd want to know. Michael's parole application was denied. He'll serve his full 8-year sentence." What was the reason? Lack of remorse and failure to accept responsibility for his crimes. Apparently, he's been telling other inmates and his counselors that you were vindictive and that he was just trying to help you. I shook my head, unsurprised by his continued delusion. Even in prison, he can't accept that he was the criminal and I was the victim. Sarah's doing worse. She got into a fight with another inmate and had 6 months added to her sentence. She's also been transferred to a higher security facility. Any word on their post-release prospects? Michael's divorce was finalized last month. Jennifer got everything: the house, custody of the children, his retirement accounts. He'll be released with nothing but debt and a criminal record. Sarah's completely isolated, no friends, no family support, no career prospects. I felt no sympathy for their suffering. They'd chosen their path when they decided to exploit my vulnerability, and they were experiencing the natural consequences of their choices. The flight home to Phoenix was peaceful, and I spent the time reading congratulatory messages from supporters who'd followed my story. But the most meaningful letter was from an unexpected source: Emma, Michael's 8-year-old daughter, who is now 10. Jennifer had apparently given Emma permission to write to me, and her letter was written in the careful handwriting of a child trying to communicate something important. "Dear Grandma Mary," it began, "Mom told me what Daddy did to you, and why he's in prison. I'm sorry he was mean to you. I don't understand why he would hurt you when you were sick. I hope you're feeling better now. Love, Emma." I read the letter 3 times, touched by the innocence and honesty of a child who understood moral right and wrong better than her father ever had. Emma and her brother James were the only innocent victims in this entire story, and I hoped they'd grow up to be better people than their father. That evening, I sat in my living room, my fully reclaimed, beautifully restored living room, and reflected on the extraordinary transformation my life had undergone. 2 years ago, I'd been a prisoner in my own basement. Tonight, I was a nationally recognized advocate whose story was inspiring legislative change and empowering abuse victims. Michael and Sarah remained in prison, their lives as thoroughly destroyed as they'd tried to destroy mine. They'd lost their freedom, their careers, their relationships, their reputations, and their futures. The children who'd seen me as a burden to be eliminated had become burdens on the state correctional system. Meanwhile, I was living freely and independently, respected and honored, with a legacy that would protect other elderly people long after I was gone. The Mary Fletcher Act had passed the state legislature unanimously and was being considered by other states as a model for enhanced elder abuse protections. Ruth Henderson had moved into my guest room after a minor fall, and we'd become true companions in our golden years. She handled the cooking while I managed the finances, and together we'd created a household based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Mary, do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't fought back? Ruth asked one evening as we sat on the deck, enjoying the sunset. Every day, I replied. I'd be in a nursing home by now, probably medicated into compliance while Michael and Sarah enjoyed the proceeds from selling my house. I'd have died thinking my children hated me, never knowing that I had the strength to protect myself. Any regrets about how hard you fought?
None.
Fighting back was the only choice that preserved my dignity and my freedom. Everything else would have been surrender. As the stars appeared over the city I'd called home for over 40 years, I felt a satisfaction so complete it was almost spiritual. Mary Fletcher had faced the ultimate test of strength and character, and she'd emerged victorious in every possible way. The basement mother had become the queen of justice, and her legacy would protect generations of elderly people from the kind of exploitation she'd survived and overcome. It was a victory worth every battle I'd fought to achieve it. 5 years had passed since my children's sentencing, and I was celebrating my 81st birthday in a way that would have been impossible during my basement imprisonment, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and respected me. The party was held in my beautifully restored dining room, the same room Sarah had converted into her art studio without my permission. Now it hosted a celebration attended by Ruth Henderson, David Blackstone and his family, Dr. Chun, who had conducted my competency evaluation, Patricia Wells from Adult Protective Services, and a dozen other friends and supporters who had become my chosen family. Mary, you have to see this, Ruth said, handing me a newspaper clipping she'd saved. The Mary Fletcher Act just passed in its 15th state. You've created a nationwide movement of protection for elderly abuse victims. I read the article with deep satisfaction. The legislation that bore my name had now been adopted across the country, providing enhanced penalties for family members who financially exploited elderly relatives and creating streamlined processes for victims to seek protection. Mrs. Fletcher, you should know that elder abuse prosecutions have increased by 400% in our state since your case, Patricia Wells added. Families know now that these crimes will be taken seriously and prosecuted aggressively. That's wonderful. Every elderly person deserves to live with dignity and respect. David Blackstone raised his glass for a toast. To Mary Fletcher, who proved that being elderly doesn't mean being powerless, and that fighting back against abuse is not only possible but powerful. As we celebrated, I reflected on the remarkable life I'd built from the ashes of my children's betrayal. My house was now a sanctuary of freedom and respect, exactly as it should have been from the beginning. I developed a routine that balanced independence with practical support, maintaining complete control over my decisions while accepting help with physically challenging tasks. The financial recovery had been complete, and then some. The civil lawsuit settlement, combined with the criminal restitution and the proceeds from liquidating Michael's and Sarah's assets, had actually left me wealthier than before their theft. I donated a significant portion to elder abuse prevention organizations, ensuring that my victory would benefit other victims. But the most satisfying aspect of my triumph wasn't the money or the recognition. It was the knowledge that justice had been served completely and permanently. Michael had been released from prison 6 months earlier after serving his full 8-year sentence. He'd emerged to find himself homeless, unemployable, and utterly alone. Jennifer had remarried and moved across the country with the children, who barely remembered him and had been told he was dangerous. His accounting career was impossible to resurrect with a felony conviction, and he was now working minimum-wage jobs and living in a halfway house. Sarah's release was still 2 years away, as her original sentence had been extended due to multiple disciplinary incidents in prison. Her art career was completely destroyed, her social connections severed, and her mental health deteriorated by years of incarceration. When she was finally released, she'd faced the same unemployability and isolation that Michael was experiencing. The children who'd seen me as an obstacle to their inheritance had instead destroyed their own inheritances and any possibility of comfortable futures. They'd gambled everything on their ability to exploit my vulnerability, and they'd lost everything they'd ever had or hoped to have. "Mary, there's something I want to ask you," Ruth said as the party wound down and we were cleaning up together. "Do you ever think about reaching out to Michael or Sarah? It's been 5 years, and they've certainly paid for their crimes." I considered the question carefully. Michael had attempted to contact me several times since his release, sending letters through David's office asking for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild our relationship. Sarah had written from prison, expressing remorse and begging for my help when she was released. Ruth, they had 40-plus years to learn how to treat me with love and respect. They chose instead to see me as a source of money and, eventually, as an obstacle to their greed. Prison sentences don't create empathy where none existed before. They just create desperation. But they're still your children. No, they're not. The children I raised died when they made the decision to exploit my stroke for their financial gain. The people who were convicted of elder abuse happen to share my DNA, but they're strangers to me now. Don't you think people can change? I think people reveal who they really are under pressure. Michael and Sarah revealed that they're fundamentally selfish people who saw their mother as a resource to be exploited. That's not something prison can fix. The truth was that I felt no emotional connection to my former children anymore. They'd severed that bond when they chose crime over compassion, exploitation over empathy. Whatever mother's love I'd once felt had been completely destroyed by their systematic abuse and betrayal. As Ruth and I finished cleaning up, I found myself thinking about Emma's letters. Michael's daughter had continued writing to me over the years, and her letters had evolved from simple childhood expressions of sympathy to more thoughtful communications from a teenager who was trying to understand her family history. Her most recent letter had included a school essay she'd written about moral courage, using my story as an example of standing up for what's right even when it's difficult. Reading about my experience through the eyes of a 15-year-old who admired my strength had been deeply moving. "Grandma Mary," she'd written, "I hope I never have to go through what you did, but if I do, I hope I'm as brave as you were. Thank you for showing me that age and illness don't make you weak. They can make you stronger if you don't let people take advantage of you." Emma and James were the only family connections I maintained, and only through written correspondence with Jennifer's supervision. They deserved to know that they had a grandmother who was strong and independent, not the broken victim their father had tried to create. That night, as I prepared for bed in my own bedroom in my own house, I looked out at the city lights and thought about the incredible journey that had brought me to this moment of complete and total victory. 5 years ago, Michael and Sarah had been successful adults with bright futures, comfortable lives, and every advantage their mother's sacrifices had provided. Tonight, Michael was a middle-aged ex-convict working for minimum wage and living in supervised housing. Sarah was still in prison, counting down the days until her release into a world that wanted nothing to do with her. They tried to destroy Mary Fletcher because they thought she was weak and helpless. Instead, they discovered that she was stronger than they'd ever imagined, and that underestimating her was the most expensive mistake of their lives. The basement prisoner had become a national symbol of resistance. The stroke victim they'd tried to silence had found her voice and used it to protect countless other elderly people. The mother they'd betrayed had created a legacy of justice that would outlast all of them. As I turned off the lights in my reclaimed kingdom, I felt a satisfaction so complete it was almost spiritual. Every battle had been worth fighting. Every humiliation had been avenged. Every crime had been punished. Every victory had been earned. Mary Fletcher had faced the ultimate test of strength and character, and she'd emerged triumphant in every possible way. The children who'd tried to bury her in a basement had instead elevated her to heights of respect and influence they could never achieve. It was, without question, the sweetest and most complete revenge imaginable. And the best part was that it would last forever, while their punishment would follow them for the rest of their miserable lives. Justice had been served, and it was absolutely delicious. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey of survival, resistance, and ultimate triumph. If this story of a mother's fight for dignity and justice inspired you, motivated you, or simply amazed you with its testament to human strength, please subscribe to Her True Stories and hit that notification bell. We have countless more tales of women who refused to be victims, who fought back against impossible odds, and who proved that age and illness are no match for determination and courage. Your support means everything to us, and we can't wait to share more stories of women who turned their darkest moments into their greatest victories. Remember, you're never too old to fight back, and you're never too weak to seek justice. Until next time, keep standing up for yourself and never let anyone convince you that you deserve anything less than respect and dignity.